So I'll pose the question, do you think more companies need to go through implicit bias training? Yes or no? I'll bring the question up at the end of discussing the details of what's happening today with Starbucks. But again, do you think more companies need to go through implicit bias training? Yes or no? Right now, 58% of the people are saying no. So more than half of you don't think that this training, bias training done by Starbucks, is going to help. Why is this happening? Why are 8,000 stores, Starbucks locations rather, across the country, why are they shutting down today for a couple of hours? Well, it's because last month we know that 2 black males were arrested. This is when they were sitting in the Starbucks in Philadelphia waiting for their friend. They had used the restroom, but because they hadn't bought anything, or they had asked to use the restroom, but because they hadn't purchased anything at Starbucks yet, who's to say they weren't going to, they were asked to please not use the restroom. They needed to anyways, and it sparked this entire debate. The employer at Starbucks ended up calling the police to say, hey, these people are being disruptive because they resisted arrest. They got arrested, and nothing happened to them. Charges were dropped, but it did spark global conversation as to whether or not we should be able to use the restroom if we're at Starbucks, and the policy has since changed, and now you can. Anyone, whether you are going into Starbucks to purchase anything or not, you can use the restroom. But the even deeper conversation is, there some sort of implicit bias that happens in any sort of community, I guess you could say, when it comes to black people in America going into a store and saying, hey, can I use the restroom? And even deeper conversations than that. But why do they need to get arrested is the big question. So now Starbucks is saying, okay, we're going to have training for a couple of hours a day to talk about bias in this country, to talk about racism in this country, because sometimes we are trained to do things or say things that we don't even know are happening, but because the way in which culture has wired our minds to think, we operate in this way, implicit bias. And so they are having that training today. And so Starbucks, if you can't go into a local Starbucks, are you mad about that today? What's the bigger conversation that we need to have? And do you think that this training is going to actually change things here in America? Yes or no?
So Stella Ray, jumping into the viewer comments right away, she's saying this is much ado about nothing. Saying, why are we covering this one? Well, we have to cover it. It's implicit bias training. There's every company in America is probably tackling this idea right now. Is this something that we need to do with our employees? And what does that look like? And something that I talked about on Morning Blend is that the American Sociological Society put together this study that said, you know what, if implicit bias training is done in order to increase diversity and make your workplace more tolerant, it's a great idea, but it doesn't seem to be working, according to the results that they have. What they did say is the one thing that makes, and this is going to seem really silly after I say it, but the one thing that makes a study really worth its salt is having the right people instructing the lessons. And so from what I have found, Starbucks has really put their money into this and hired the right people to do the training, and whether or not this works going forward, we shall see. But a question that I have coming up in the comments here is, are more companies going to follow suit and have this training? I don't know.
We'll see how successful this is, because according to Starbucks, or according to people who have been tracking how much they will actually lose today, they will be out $12 million. Yes, $12 million. So will a couple of hours for 8,000 Starbucks across the country for them to shut down, will the training and the outcome be worth the $12 million loss? A big question I'm seeing pop up is, what time are they closing so I can go get my Starbucks? Well, here locally, we did some research here locally around 2:30. They will be shutting down for a couple of hours. So go before, go after, but really think about why it is they're closing down and chime in on that conversation, because you can go get coffee or a drink anywhere else.
Walt Gray is saying if you are headed to Starbucks, he'll take a venti chai latte non-fat. So Walt Gray, I've got your message out there.
Okay, it's
thumbs
there.
up.
So
and
you mentioned the right. You mentioned the right people. So Common, this he's very outspoken when it comes to racial issues. He's going to be one of the people that will help lead this discussion. I'm sure it's probably a video that will play at Starbucks all across the area. But you know, he's one of these minds that is very outspoken when it comes to black issues. So it's good that he has a seat at the table. It'll remain to be seen if this has any effect. I think when you're tackling bias on any level, whether it's race, sex, any type of deal, that's going to be something really hard to do. So will we see an outcome within the next 90 days at Starbucks?
Right.
I don't know. I appreciate the effort, but I do think it's like, ooh, what can we do to fix this little PR mess that we've gotten ourselves in?
That's so many people were commenting this morning saying this is just a Band-Aid, this is just a PR stunt. Starbucks isn't looking for actual results. They're just looking for what's going to make them look good in the
That's
news.
a very cynical way of looking at the world.
Yes, what do you suggest they do? Nothing?
So
I appreciate them doing it.
Is this going to fix the world? No. Okay, but it's not about fixing the world in 2 hours in one afternoon on a Tuesday after Memorial Day. It's about trying to do something. It's about you know, a lot of the disrespect, a lot of the lack of interaction has long-lasting consequences to how we all work. And you know, Starbucks wants to sell coffee. They want to sell those delicious muffins that they have. And for my daughter, they want to sell some cake pops, and they do. Okay.
How did you know?
So they're a business. And you know, a coffee shop, let's just be honest about this. It's one of those universal places where you are expected to be able to go in and sit down and interact with your community. Because for most people, you know, your coffee shop, whether it's Starbucks or some other local one, you know, they want it to be your secondary home. It's a place outside of the house where you sit down. So you're going to see the same faces. You're going to interact. You're assuming that most people in that Starbucks, they live in the neighborhood. Yeah. You have similar interests, similar experiences. So anything that can sort of bind that together is going to be a positive thing. I think Starbucks sees no downside in doing this. $12 million is nothing to them.
Multi-billion-dollar
and
company,
you know, for a lot of people don't know what they don't know. People just go through life, and their experiences in life will dictate how they interact with the world. You can't blame people for that. If you grow up in a suburb that's predominantly one way, whatever that is, then that's your interaction with the world, and you're going to see the world that way.
Yeah.
But then if you go to work in a Starbucks, and there's a multitude of different incomes, different races, different ages, different backgrounds, people with special needs, people that have no place to live, people with mental issues happening, they all still go to Starbucks because it's a place to go. So I don't think it's necessarily just about race. I think it's just about treating the customer as an equal, so they have a good experience, so that everybody feels good about what's going on in that store at that time. I don't think they see any downside to this.
I agree. Win-win. We look good. If that's it, that's the cynical, that's the devil's advocate. We look good, and you know, this is probably a healthy conversation we need to have anyway.
Yeah, we're having it here, and we'll continue to have it, and we'll see the results of today. We'll talk about them tomorrow, and then we can continue that conversation. But continue to vote right now. We'll revisit it at the end of this show. abc10.com/vote. Do you think more companies need to go through implicit bias training? Thanks for watching us here on the ABC 10 Information Network. If you want to see more stories just like this one, click subscribe.